Welcome to Yesterday's Airlines, once again for another 400 scale model review. And this is going to be for the Thai Airways International Airbus A300-600 HSTAD, which is one of the July Aeroclassics releases. As per usual, all my reviews are split into three sections. We get a look at the mould, we get a look at the livery, and we get a look at the printing and construction quality. Each of those can score a maximum of 10 for a maximum combined score of 30, just like the written reviews I do at modelairliner.com. So, Thai Airways International is another one of the traditional national carriers that's got itself into quite a lot of difficulty. It's been poorly run for a long time. It's had a very diverse fleet, but the A300s were always a really key element of that fleet during the 1990s and early 2000s. And it's really nice to get some Thai A300s from Aeroclassics. It wasn't the only one they released this month. They also did a very nice ASIAM A300-2, which may well appear on my AV history blog at some point. But nonetheless, today we're going to be checking out this Thai Airways example. So let's get started. Okay, so I've got a lot of Airbus A300s in my collection, but almost all of them are from Aeroclassics. So it's quite difficult to do a mold comparison with anyone else's. And the fact that I've got so many Aeroclassics A300s kind of tells you what I think about the mold. It is one of my favorite wide body molds from AC. It is a really, really nice mold. And as per usual, one of the main reasons is because it's got such a nice nose cone and cockpit area here. Really, really nicely put together, and actually a really nice front gear leg too. And overall, the whole mould sits just really nicely. Moving back, you can see that it is a cradle mount mould, so there is quite a large seam here. That is probably the biggest drawback of the mould, and if that wasn't there, this mould would be pretty much perfect in my opinion. But it doesn't dramatically bother me either. Moving back, you've got a really nice line on the rear fuselage. Everything is looking good and in the right kind of place. So obviously, because this is a 600, you've got the little winglets on the end there, and overall, it's a really nice representation. Now, the only other Airbus A300 I have in 400 scale is the Dragon Wings example. And I actually happen to have a Thai Airways one, which is going to provide an interesting comparison to this new Thai Airways release. This is by Dragon Wings. It's a good mold, actually. It's probably the second best A300 that exists in this scale, but it doesn't meet the standards that Aeroclassics is putting here. The nose, it's not quite as pointy. It's not quite as nice. The transition between the cockpit and the fuselage there is not quite as sharp and not quite as correct. Obviously, the landing gear is inferior because it's an older Dragon mold, and Dragon just don't do, particularly good undercarriage. In other ways, though, this is a good mold. One of the things that a lot of the A300s kind of do in this scale is not sit high enough. And again, I think the Dragon one sits a little bit lower than the Aeroclassics. It's not a dramatic issue. Oh, there we go. One of the undercarriages come off. Classic Dragon Wings. But it's a decent mold. It's not as good. But it is substantially better than the competing molds that I don't own, which are the Phoenix mold, which, I sound like I give Phoenix a drubbing every time I do one of these videos, I imagine. And frankly, Phoenix have done some really nice molds over the years, but the A300 just isn't one of them. The mold itself looks good. It doesn't have a seam either, so it's actually quite nice until you get to the nose. And the nose on the Phoenix A300 is just awful. The transition between the cockpit and the nose cone is just dreadful. It doesn't look anything like an A300. So every time I see one, I think, look at that nose. So I just don't buy them. They're just not very nice, And the Aeroclassics A300, even with the seam, is vastly superior. The other mold, which is also available, though quite hard to find, and you probably wouldn't waste your time trying to search it out, is the blue box mold again. It's not a very attractive mold. It's not got a great nose. It's got a huge seam, much worse than the one on the Aeroclassics. It's got really short undercarriage, so the whole thing looks kind of ugly. Whereas the A300 itself is actually quite an attractive aircraft. So, in my opinion, this is the best mold by some distance in 400 scale. Sometimes I hear people saying, hey, we need a new A300 in 400. No, we don't. This one's perfectly good. There are so many more aircraft types that are demanding a new mold in 400 scale than the A300. It is, crazy to suggest that we need one of these over, say, a DC-910 or an MD-80, or a whole bevy of other really more important types which have been poorly treated in this scale. So this isn't perfect. I'm going to knock a point off for the wing seam there, but really this is a 9 out of 10 mold in my opinion. It's a very nice mold. So always happy to see Aeroclassics releases using this. Now on to the livery, and this is a very well known and a very well liked scheme from Thai Airways International. I think this is meant to be like an orchid on the tail and moving to the front. I mean, it's a very attractive livery, and one which was widely recognised around the world during the 80s and 90s. And even though the new scheme's nice, it's kind of not as nice as this one, frankly. So how have Aeroclassics done on this? Well, this is where I can compare this to some of the other models in my collection wearing the scheme, of which I've only got 2 to be honest, but one of them is an A300. And you can see here that for Dragon, that the first thing that strikes you here, I'll move those both into the center, is that the colours are not the same. So Aeroclassics has got, the central pink stripe is nice, the gold edging is nice, but the central colour here, which is, more like a burgundy kind of colour, I think, on the Dragon release, is quite purpley on the Aeroclassics. Which I don't really understand. The Dragon clearly looks more like the real thing. And in fact, here's an old Aeroclassics release of a DC-8-62. And you can see here that, again, it doesn't look anything like it. It's a completely different colour. So I really don't understand, and it does infuriate somewhat, that Aeroclassics often will produce, a different model with completely the same livery, but not getting the colours matched. And you can see that these two pretty much match up. So there's no shadow of a doubt to think that the old DC-8 there and that Dragon A300 have got the correct colours, and the colours of the core part of the cheat line and the internal part of the tail orchid are not correct. So it's definitely losing some points in that regard. Otherwise, the cheat line is nicely put on. The titles look pretty nice as well. Haven't got any real complaints there. In fact, the titles are probably slightly nicer than on the Dragon wings. It's got a really nice sheen to the tail logo. The gold printing is very nice. So I don't really have any other complaints about how the scheme has been approached, but the colour is just way off. So that's a bit disappointing. Incidentally, you can see here that the aircraft name is on the under the cockpit windows here, and the name of the aircraft is Yu Tong or Yu Thong, possibly. My Thai pronunciation obviously is non-existent. And I did look up what that means, and it is apparently a style of the representation of Buddha, which comes from within Thailand. So it's got an interesting name. It's in English script on this side of the aircraft, and on the starboard side it's in Thai script. So they've got these details. You can see it's also got the Star Alliance star here just behind the cockpit. So it's got what you'd expect, but they have rather mucked up the colours, which is a shame. So knock a couple of points off for that aspect. Not 2 off, I think, at least, because that's quite a major problem, and is a sort of thing which I think a lot of collectors would probably go, maybe I should sell this because it doesn't match up with my other Thai Airways aircraft. So that's a little bit disappointing. Okay, up onto the stand for the final part of the review, and we can turn it around and we can see that the printing here is nice. The cockpit printing on this A300 is great. There's no real print defects here. I don't think that in this case the cockpit, not the cockpit, the fuselage windows are too high. Sometimes you can moan at Aeroclassics for printing the liner windows too high. They do curve up towards the end, as they ought to do so on an A300. So I think the printing is pretty good. Obviously you don't get some of the extra detail on the engines or the nose cone or such that you would with some other manufacturers. But the printing is pretty decent. What is there is nicely printed. And actually, if you look over the wing, I particularly like the fact they've actually printed some of this flat detailing on here, which is which is actually pretty good. So, you know, I'd say that, you know, printing is reasonably strong here and up to Aeroclassics' usual standards, and you can decide for yourself whether that is a damning with faint praise or not. You know, one thing which I am a little bit annoyed about, though, is those silvery fan blades. I don't know why Aeroclassics sometimes leave the fan blades silver on their models, and sometimes, you know, go to some effort to make them, you know, a more realistic, darker color. Sometimes they're way too dark, in fact, but in this case, they just have kind of forgotten about it or cared enough to do anything about it. And it's, you know, very silvery. It kind of has the look of a model which may have appeared, you know, around 2008, 2010, which I guess is something you could level at quite a lot of Aeroclassics releases. AC hasn't really changed, hasn't really dramatically improved the way it's built models for some time. They used to be, you know, the best, the highest quality models you could get. Other manufacturers have kind of overtaken them for detailing and printing as well. But at the same time, you're still getting models like this A300, which overall look, you know, really nice and are on good molds, but just, you know, perhaps not at the highest echelon of the scale anymore. So I think I'm going to knock a point off for that. Obviously, you can see it's well put together. There's no real construction issues, no tire tabs, none of that nonsense. It's well made. So yeah, that gives this one a 9 for the printing and the quality control. So in summary, you know, this is a solid release from Aeroclassics, and if they'd have got the colours a bit closer to what they ought to be, which is more this kind of colour, then it would be getting a better score. But it is not quite correct in the colours, and that is the biggest error with this. Nonetheless, AC A300s are generally really good models as long as they're not printing the cockpit windows too high, which they haven't in this case. So this is getting, you know, a 9 for the mould, it's getting an 8 for the livery, it's getting a 9 for the printing. It's scoring a pretty solid and decent 26 out of 30, which is actually a pretty good score nowadays for a lot of what Aeroclassics produce. So, you know, it's up to you whether the colour is something that's going to upset you. Maybe you'll stick with your older Dragon Wings A300. I'm not sure if Phoenix made a version of this. They probably have. You might, you know, find the colour is too off-putting. But for me, you know, I like the mould, and the mould tends to be the focus. And it is a better mould than the tie, though it is a close run thing in this case because the tie A300 is quite nice. So I'm a little bit torn. I'm not entirely certain whether I will sell on this tie A300. I might keep both of them. It would have been, you know, nice if Aeroclassics had made my decision a bit easier. But overall, it's a decent model, if not, you know, world class. So, thanks for watching the video. Leave a like if you enjoyed it. And obviously, subscribe to the channel and check out my website, yesterdaysairlines.com. Loads more of this kind of reviews and updates about what's going on in the die-cast industry, and the history of the scale, and lots of other cool stuff. So keep checking that out. Thanks very much for watching. See you later.